Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Radical Democracy. I'm Maddi. Cheers. Thanks for tuning in. So today's show will be with Karolina Allen, we hope. We're having some technical difficulties again. Hopefully she will call in at any moment and we can talk about her visit to the UN conference on civility, on civil society, which is why we called the show Radical Civility today. And actually, I think it's a wonderful topic because I think we're seeing less and less of a civil society in our world right now. I think this has become a real problem for us here in the United States, in that we cannot seem to simply sit down and talk to each other. When we disagree with each other, it becomes a big problem. So when you have a situation where you are disagreeing with someone, you really need to step back if you feel like it's going to turn into a name-calling match. We've talked about this before. We've talked about training your children in this way and raising your children in this way. But more importantly than stepping back, it might be a really good idea to sit down and listen to their point of view and try to understand them. I think that this is something that we are truly missing today in this discussion, and certainly in our political discussion. So what I will update you on is my run for office. I'm not. I have decided not to run for office because I feel that what I want to say and what I need to say as far as my personal truth-telling goes cannot be achieved when I'm running for office. It is a sad state of affairs. So when I took the training to run at Vote, Run, Lead, it was a beautiful day. Everybody was unlabeled. Nobody was talking about whether they were a Democrat or Republican, pro-choice, pro-life, pro-anything, anti-anything. Everybody just talked on the topics that interest us, on the things that we were going to hope to bring to office, to bring to government, and the ways that we felt that women could change government. The training was wonderful. They talked about how this is like a full-time job, and sadly talked about the huge amounts of money you have to raise, especially if you are running for federal government. Literally millions of dollars if you're going to run for Congress, and especially if you're running against an incumbent. Extremely important to raise all this gigantic amount of money because, as those of you that have been listening and know when I've talked about politics, I believe money has to come out of government completely. I also believe that we have to go into a state of change. We are in flux already. The question is, what are we going to choose? How are we going to do this? If we're going to be in flux, what do we want to change to? And I think that's the big question in a country where you've got over 300 million people. It is a big question. What do you want to change to? And that requires us to sit and speak to each other civilly, to understand that we are all in this together. So we have to come up with solutions that work for everybody, not just a few people, that give power back to everybody. The other thing I discovered in running for government was that as soon as we had this beautiful, nice day where nobody was labeling anybody, where everybody was just talking ideas, immediately, once posts went up, once it went back to the page, it started to become about whose side are you on? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? And there are some very nasty tones that have been taken. I wouldn't say on that page, but as you know, that on both sides, there have been some truly nasty things said about each other. And I think that what I want to bring what I wanted to bring in the political discussion was a way of talking to each other. I reached out to both major parties. I can't say, I take that back. I did not reach out to the Republicans because where I'm running, the Republican is an incumbent and would have run. He is very popular. He's actually a very nice guy. He's a great guy. I don't have anything against him personally, but I think that we need a more expansive view of who should be included. And so I felt like I would run for Congress. So it was suggested that I reached out to the Democrats. And when I reached out to the Democrats, I told them that I was not going to run a divisive campaign. I simply wasn't going to run anything negative, Period, the end. The only thing I would talk about were my ideas, the way I thought that things should go. And I certainly was not going to sit in a debate and hurt someone's soul. So when you talk about indigenous government, which we talk about a lot here, this is a primary concern that no matter what activity you're in, and especially if you are going to be in a leadership position, you do not hurt someone's soul, that you do not damage someone's spirit, so that when you are facing an opponent, you are not degrading him or her. You are simply talking about what your ideas are, and you are looking for a way to remain friends so that when one of you is elected, that you can work together, because you have to know that that person is representing a different voice than you have. So to me, being a spiritual person, this idea of not damaging someone's soul is extremely important. I am extremely upset about the amount of nastiness, of negativity there is being thrown at spiritual people, talking down to us. I love Colin Quinn's new comedy routine he's on Netflix or Prime, I can't remember which one. It's called Red State, Blue State, and he really nails it in a really funny way. I only wish I was as funny as him. But he talks about, if you're going to sit there and put down all of these religions, the Christian religion, the Jewish religion, the Islamic religion, if you're going to put down religion in general and call people stupid who are spiritual, why would they vote for you? Why are you surprised when they turn their back on you? And that's a lot of what's going on. We are blaming. All I'm hearing in this political discussion is blaming, is one side blaming the other side, rather than real ideas and real solutions in order to get to those ideas. So you're a socialist. Good, you're a socialist. How do you make a country of 330 million people without North Sea oil? Because I've said this a million times, we're always comparing ourselves to Norway. How do you get a country like that to be a socialist country that has never been a socialist country? How do you take away freedoms that people are used to having? So hopefully this is Karolina calling in, and we can get back to that question later. So, Karolina?
Hi, Maddi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so sorry I'm late.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. You know me, I can talk. It's my superpower, talking. So
Okay.
welcome. I'm so glad to have you back. So I'm going to leave that. I'm going to close up for those of you listening with that discussion of politics and how do we talk to each other civilly, and how do we really solve problems in this country, not constantly using other countries that don't really line up with what's going on here. So I'm going to leave that discussion for another time. And we'll go to you, and we do want to hear about what happened at the UN conference.
Thank you so much for providing this opportunity for me to share a little bit about what happened. It's kind of a mixed bag of emotions for a lot of people. I think the potential of having like a civil society conference that was focused on inclusivity and civility and all of the things that go with it to create sustainable cities is something that was initially really, really exciting for people. Because my maternal feminist organization, Big Ocean Women, we've experienced a lack of those things at other UN conferences. We were hoping that, well, perhaps the focus is on civility and inclusivity, that we wouldn't be marginalized the way that some other, pro-life or pro-family groups are kind of marginalized. And so we were hopeful about that. And then sadly, like at the very onset, working behind the scenes on the UN workshop committee, I started realizing that it wasn't the case. And then,
wow.
So that was unfortunate. And then there was just tremendous disorganization, lack of communication. Sadly, this was put on by the United Nations Department of Global Communications, which you would think would be, a little bit better at communicating. But it was just a constant onslaught of trying to put out fires, by misinformation and miscommunication happening from the United Nations. And then it was really sad and unfortunate to see how often United Nations, official representatives would kind of turn around and blame the Salt Lake host committees and things for things. And so
Wow.
it was just kind of shocking, really. Just you'd think that an international organization that is really working diligently to try to get all of these countries and all of these, civil society organizations and nonprofits and everybody, quote unquote, stakeholders on board with their agenda and their plan, you'd think that they would be a little bit more planned, or good and competent in executing certain plans, like a conference, this was a 68. You'd think that they'd have things more put together. It started way too late.
Wow.
We're constantly getting told a slew of different things, like prices for events kept changing, just like a ton of issues that we were, as a host committee, host committees, I would say, we're just working overtime to try to mitigate all of these challenges. So anyway, I think the hope is, though, that it's still possible. I don't know. I feel like if organizations are open to changing and improving and making corrections and admitting where they're wrong and where they lack, then I think it's still, a much needed effort.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I not gonna give up on that hope,
Well, that's just it. We can't give up on the hope. And I just posted something from that young child that works for the environment. Thunberg is her last name, though for some reason I can't think of her first name. But she talks about how hope is good, but when you act, then you always have hope. And I think that what you're doing is taking action. And it's sad that what happens a lot is that we do, when things go wrong, we sit around and we blame each other. We blame somebody. We always have to blame.
Yes.
I mentioned that in the opening, that there's a lot of blaming going on, that in politics, the whole reason I decided not to run for office is that I really felt like I would be more effective promoting the Women's Oneness Project and helping to get people to actually sit down and be civil and talk to each other and stop blaming. When you're blaming, you're coming from a position of weakness. You're saying, I don't have the power to do anything. And so you're blaming somebody else for getting you where you are. And that has to go away. That concept, that idea in a civil society has to go away. You have to take responsibility for where you are and who you are. You have to own the fact that we didn't come into this being organized enough. Okay, how do we fix it next time? Don't blame the host city who's trying desperately to get you what you need for the things that aren't going wrong because you were disorganized coming into the presentation. So I think that idea of getting away from blaming is extremely important, and working towards understanding of somebody who has a different opinion than you have, understanding of yourself, understanding of why you're doing the blaming.
Yeah. And it comes from a place of scarcity of, I can only imagine an international organization that has so much, influence and reach in the world. It would be a humbling thing for them to admit, to say, we failed in these areas. And one of the saddest things is that they actually canceled one more blatantly, but another one behind the scenes. I kind of saw what happened and the kind of mess that happened. One of the workshops was actually canceled 2 days before the conference. And,
wow.
I don't care how much you disagree with somebody. You just don't do that to people. You don't deplatform them. 2 days before the conference, they had paid their fees. They had reserved hotel rooms and airfare for all of their speakers. Some were international. It was just really disheartening to see that. And so I think in the same vein of I think problem solving is, the solution to the blaming. I think blaming is you're displacing all of your negative emotions and scarcity mindset and projecting them on someone else. But taking ownership for things that have happened and then coming clean and then looking to work for solutions, I think is a much better way to channel your energy, as you've so aptly put. But it does take some uncomfortableness in pinpointing where things went wrong. Like, that still needs to happen. And people need to have honest conversations about that. And then, two parties can kind of come together and work towards solutions. But yeah, the blame gaming is definitely, it just builds walls and it keeps people from really working through problems.
Exactly. And we never come up with solutions. And like I said earlier in your post about your son, which I actually do want you to talk about, if we're going to talk about civility, is it's become a radical idea to listen, to understand, to accept responsibility. I was talking to somebody recently about changing the name of the show, because the show's called Radical Democracy, because on Instagram there's some other things with that title that don't line up with what I'm doing. I call it Radical Democracy because of my knowledge of the Great Law of Peace, a democracy that lasted, some say, 2,000 years. And where it was all about creating a civil society. It was all about listening to everybody's voice, about being more concerned about what's fair than what's right, about raising your children to look at each other respectfully, to treat each other respectfully, teaching boys to respect women from the time they're born. I don't remember if we had talked about the concept of, when you look in indigenous cultures that have sweat lodges or temescals, which is the Mesoamerican version of a sweat lodge, when you look at those cultures, that is always described as a feminine experience, is always described as you going in to the womb of the mother and coming out reborn. So when you are entering a sacred space, you understand that womb is a sacred space. You understand that motherhood is sacred. You've been doing this since you were a child. You understand that if you, the man, are going to enter the woman, this is sacred space, just like the sweat lodge. And, I've heard the elders teach their sons and daughters, respect this space. You as the woman, respect your space. You as the man, respect the space. So that when we look at these indigenous cultures whose, you could argue, their entire way of life was based on the teaching of respect for the elders, respect for nature, respect for the community, respect for yourself. When we look at that compared to what we're looking at now, I think we need to go back. I mean, you and I know have talked about this before. And I want you to, say whatever else you feel like you need to say about the UN, and then if you could talk about what happened to your son, sadly, yesterday.
Sure. I think the two kind of go hand in hand, to tell you the truth. I mean, I'm having similar emotions. I feel like what happened with the United Nations is, they came as guests. They came as into our home, right? Into this sacred space, which is Utah, Salt Lake City, this specific city. They were the guests, and we were the hosts. And we did everything in our power with very poor communication and direction and support. And this is from my end in working on one of these committees from the Salt Lake end, really trying our very best to represent not just Salt Lake, but the UN well. We wanted it to be a successful conference. And I think to a lot of people that didn't know what happened behind the scenes, I think it was. But I think respect goes a long way when you're going into someone's home, when you're going into their sacred space, and just to offer your very best and to come with humility and to come with this openness, right?
Exactly.
I think that's critical. I think that's what we're missing. And the same thing is when we hosted this football team, Kahuku, and my goodness, my husband is from Hawaii. Like our family, Laie is a beloved place to our family. Kavika, my husband, is his sister was Kathy or Moana Allen, and was very beloved by that community. And it's an incredible, these are our brothers and sisters. Like
Right.
This is our kin. So of course we did our very best to welcome them. With a luau, we participated in this awesome fundraiser and all of these amazing things. And there's this brotherly connection between these two schools. But sadly, when it came down to it, I just felt like there were some serious cheap shots, that kept the very best of sportsmanship and the potential for these young men to really step up, in the way that could represent both communities so well.
Right.
And I feel like we're both damaged by that.
Absolutely.
And so I feel like this sense of respect when you come to someone's home, and the sense of respect when you're out there on the field, to bring your very best, competitive-wise, toughness-wise, but also to have some kind of boundaries where those things can be crossed. And when they are, I think that it's important to point that out so that we can improve.
Exactly.
I don't, just like in Salt Lake, I want to welcome you to our home, UN, but we're not your doormat. And I'm going to call you out on things that need to be improved. And let's sit down, let's talk about it. Same with, Kahuku. We welcome you to our home here at Timpview, but we're not going to be your doormats. And what happened is, there were some extremely cheap shots taken, like 15 personal fouls, and, where it clearly looks like headhunting. And they knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that, my kid is the only quarterback. Like the back, what do you call it? The second string quarterback left, I think a week before we started the season. So, there literally is nobody else. And I mean, that position is vital for any team to be able to compete. And just those kind of, after the play was done, repeated shots, unnecessarily happening. And I think, and here's another point that we can take is that there are referees, that are supposed to be managing games.
Right.
And when you allow, as a referee, your job is to keep the game competitive enough, but with as little injury to these boys as possible. I mean, these are growing boys. Head injuries are life-threatening and damaging,
Exactly.
So I think that in life we need to kind of, as a civil society and as, communities, we need to point out inconsistencies and seek for solutions where things can be fair.
Exactly.
And put in place certain measures like referees or, certain policies that can, build upon that to the best of our ability, and then find ways to work through times in which they don't measure up. But, referees have a responsibility to keep things, in line so that
we're the
don't
adults.
have these kind of, exactly. And sadly, like on my Facebook feed right now, it's, we're getting all sorts of backlash, which is, expected. And I think that that's fine. But I think also part of a civil society is that we give each other space to have an opinion and to verbalize our discontent. And as long as we can keep it civil and we can work through our problems, I think that's going to be where the outcomes happen, is working through them. Now, if I would have kept myself bottled up and said, you know what, I'm just so mad, but I'm not going to say anything about it, I think that's damaging too, because then I would have not had any way to release my frustration at the situation, or if I would have done the same thing about the UN, and I would have just consistently kept turning the other cheek, so to speak. I think that, that has its challenges too, because certain things do need to be brought to light.
Right.
And we do need to have conversation.
Well, and in all honesty, I have never interpreted Jesus's words of turning the other cheek to mean that you just walk away and become a doormat. Well, I've interpreted that as standing up for something in a civil, respectful way. You hit me, I'm not hitting you back. But if you'd like to sit down and talk about why you're angry at me, if you want to have a discussion about this and act like human beings, I'm good with that. I'm very good with that. Right. And really, if you look back in all of Jewish tradition is arguing, for those of you unfamiliar with the fact that Jesus grew up more than likely in a very mystical Jewish tradition, but and it's all about questioning. You're raised to question. You're raised to question the Bible. You're raised to have discussions. You're raised to face your teacher and say, not quite getting this thing, over here. Can we talk about this? And you talk about it. So you're raised in that tradition. So to me, when...
It's healthy. That's healthy for society.
Yeah. So
you need that.
Yes. So to me, when somebody says turn the other cheek, it's not a walking away like, oh, okay, I'm gonna let you get away with it. Yeah, all right. I'm gonna be the peaceful one, and you're not. It's more of I'm not gonna meet you where you are. And if that place where you are is anger and degradation, I'm not going there with you. Which is, again, one of the reasons why I'm not running for office, because I'm not gonna do it. I am not going to run. I had mentioned that I reached out to the Democrats and told them how I wanted to run, and they had no interest in me running. And I reached out to a couple of other, outer parties. I have some interest from the Libertarians, but not for running. But I personally have decided not to run because I'm just not going to be there in that. I'm not going to jump into the fray. It's not something I believe in. So
and I think what you're doing with this Oneness Project and the Women's Oneness Project and this radio show specifically is so fruitful. And I think having these conversations where people get to actually hear how it's being modeled and how to have these, thoughtful conversations is what we need at the cultural level.
Right.
Which then hopefully can give us the wherewithal and the integrity as a people to demand that of our elected leaders as well,
Yeah, and so immediately... sorry. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I said I think you're doing a great work with this, and I think that, the political aspect will come if we can keep growing this at the grassroots.
Exactly. And maybe not even in our generation. It makes no difference. I'm in the whole 7-generation mentality of the Haudenosaunee. And which the first thing when I read what happened to your son on the field, the first thing I thought of was the Haudenosaunee and Lacrosse. So the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, are the people who gave us the game of lacrosse, a very tough game designed to train boys to become men, but give them everything they needed to become men. And that includes respect. So respectful play was required. You were playing. I have this friend, Bill, who was the one who told me all about the origins of lacrosse. So he grew up playing with, you started at 5. You could be in a game by age 6, and you could be playing with people as old as 80, depending on who decided to play that day. So if you as a young man had to make sure you didn't run into any 5-year-olds, you didn't knock over any old people, which is probably that kind of awareness explains why they're so good at it still, and also you could not say anything mean. To this day, Haudenosaunee players are not allowed to speak in any sort of disrespectful way to their own teammates or to the other teammate. That will get you kicked out for life. That you could be the best player in the world. And if you pull what got pulled at your son's game yesterday, you are gone. That's it. And because your kids are in high school, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Because the Haudenosaunee were smart enough to recognize that sports figures, anybody who's good at that is going to be a role model for children. So if you're going to be a role model in the game of lacrosse, which they believe is a spiritual game, was a gift to them by the creator to train boys to become men. If you're going to be in that role model position, you have the same responsibilities as somebody who is a leader. And number one in being a Haudenosaunee leader is being respectful of others and being humble. So you are seen when you're playing sports, you are seen as being in a leadership position. And certainly if you're in the old days, the games were run by the grandfathers. If you're in that elder position / referee position, you are responsible for seeing that that is the way that the game is played. So you look to you look to what happened to your son yesterday, what we see on TV all the time. I know one elder who absolutely does not let his kids watch. He is traditional Longhouse, traditional Haudenosaunee. His kids are not allowed to watch American sports until they're 16 years old, until they're old enough to understand that, hey, this isn't the way we play. That's sad. Yeah. And they're big football fans. Sad. They're huge football fans.
I love the sport, and our family is big into sports because it's exactly that. I see them growing into the resilient, strong, determined, yet humble people that, I want them to be, and I feel like sports is such a beautiful vehicle to accomplish that. But, I can't help it as a mom if I'm seeing my kids stretched out, that they're in the ER with a concussion and getting a CT scan thinking that there was a neck injury, I just, and I have to admit that I this morning when I made that post on my Facebook, it was coming from a place of frustration.
Sure.
And so I'm sure that there are a lot of the Kahuku fans that feel like my words were, cutting and very, inaccurate, perhaps from their perspective. I'm sure that that's the case, and why, people are pushing back on that. And I have to, take that into consideration.
Yes.
Like this is the sport. When I signed my kid up to play, these are the risks. I get it. And I was an athlete. My husband's an athlete. We get it. We've been through our fair share of injuries. But I can't help but get over the feeling that,
it was intentional.
There has to be some kind of a, with the referees, with the organization of how, these games are played, and with coaches, that we have to do our very best to bring that out, the very best that sports can have, and minimize the damages that it can create, not just physical damages, but also like spiritual ones where, kids are so desperate to impress their coaches or the fans or something that they're pulling these kind of stunts on other kids. We've got to challenge that, and demand, even if, let's say, my son's coach isn't directly talking to the boys about that, which I hope he is, I don't know, but I, as a parent, need to be doing that and saying, hey, there's something that you just don't do.
Right.
Please. And so we have to bring that kind of culture back. But I think that when people are, from fans and from parents' perspectives, from coaches' perspectives, when we're in a place of deficit ourselves, we want to reflect the win. We want to have that so that we can appease our own insecurities and our own life letdowns or whatever that is. So there's this desperateness to win.
Yep.
But when it's coming at all costs, where your honor and your integrity is on the line, we are failing. Like, that's not a win. And
that's
I think
not
that,
right.
We have to really be intentional about that as we're raising our kids, as we're coaching Little League, as we're, sitting in the bleachers, that the game is the game of life ultimately. It's not just, a 2-hour football game.
The honesty and integrity and honor part of life is what seems to be going down the tubes, and not just at your son's game, certainly in politics. I mean, there just is simply, there is simply a move away from civility. And and away from honor and integrity. And it cannot, I cannot say this enough, cannot be laid at the doorstep of one party or one individual. Everybody
Yeah.
is engaging in it. And what people who are not, who don't have a spiritual, or I would argue even a scientific base, so I'm sure there are scientists out there who are going to argue with me, it's all energy. If you are being mean and nasty, if you are degrading somebody else, if you are cheating, if you are intentionally causing harm, if you are being dishonorable, it doesn't matter if you're doing all those things for your guy or your girl or your team. You are in that energy of being dishonorable. You have no integrity. The universe, or whatever you want to call it, God, whatever you call that, is not reading you as, oh, well, but they're being horrible for a good cause. No, you're only being read as being horrible. You know, I had a spiritual teacher, Bertha Valdez, who's just a wonderful, wonderful woman. And she always says that when it comes to integrity, when it comes to true spirituality, there is no gray area. She taught me that when you're acting from a moral, spiritual place, you are acting in the light or in the dark. And once you cross, like you can't be a healer, in her example, because she is a healer, you can't be a healer and say, but just this one time I'm going to put a curse on that person over there, you know?
Yeah.
Just this once. Just because once you cross, and you open the door to that diminishing of integrity and honesty and healing even. And that what we need to bring back is this idea in when you see it on an ethical level, if you're going to talk no spirituality, what we see happen, if we just look at what happened in your son's game, if we look at what's going on in politics right now, hypocrisy. If you're not going to act with integrity, you're a hypocrite. If you're going to turn around and get all upset with somebody who's not voting the way you want them to vote, and you're going to call them stupid, then that's the energy you're engaged in. You're not making things better just because you think you're voting for the right party or rooting for the right team. You're all functioning on that lower energy level of fear and anger. And you're not improving anything.
Reminded me, right. and one thing that reminded me, while you were talking, it reminded me too that we don't give each other very much space for redemption. Like we don't give anybody space to fix it and to get better. It's like we want to keep them in the hypocrisy box, you know?
Yep.
And I think that's unfair because we're all hypocrites and nobody's perfect. And so we have to allow ourselves room for people who are intentionally trying to do better.
Right.
And I believe in that. I believe that that's all the hope we have, really.
Right.
That we give each other this grace and that we believe in each other, that we can change. Like, because I know what it feels like to not be in line, you know, and to be, you know, projecting things from a place of scarcity and anger. I know that, but I want to do better. And I think that, you know, if I can seek to do better in my own life, you know, and be honest about it, and then just, you know, have that goodwill for other people too.
Right.
Even if they are politicians, which is a hard thing to say, because I think the hard thing to say about it with politicians is that I think that they just conveniently change so that they can, you know what I mean? Like it's not a very genuine change.
No.
It's not a heartfelt, intentional thing from deep within the soul. It's so that they can get, you know, the right voting community to support them.
But it's the people. It is we the people. We have to take that responsibility. You're talking about the UN taking responsibility for the things they did wrong, which they don't want to do. We the people here in this country have to take responsibility for the fact that we have set ourselves up to have less than good leaders. I do not see the kind of leadership that you find in indigenous communities. I do not see this level of service. I do not see choosing leaders who are committed to serving the people before themselves. They just talk a good game, and we're letting them. And then when, I have had some really, obnoxious comments made towards me because I think everybody should be voting for anybody but a Democrat or Republican. And I've said that kind of jokingly, anybody but in 2020. And I have had people go berserk. Oh, you're going to get that one reelected. You're going to get this one elected. You can't say that. How are we going to change? I always go back to Albert Einstein's quote. You cannot solve a problem using the same level of consciousness that created it. You're going to keep in this two-party system. If you're not going to speak again, energy, if you're going to keep your energy stuck in fear and anger and hypocrisy, then we're all going to be stuck there with you. So the idea is, you want change? Let's really commit to change. Let's have courage. Yeah. I've mentioned...
And having a variety of voices, I think, allows for the debate to go beyond what, these little sound bites are, that we get from either party. And I think it's a diversity of viewpoints. And I think that is a sign of a really healthy, thriving society, is when you have all these different angles that can look at things. And it allows for nuance and certain, ironclad issues that we just can't seem to get beyond, that help us really come to legitimate solutions and the unity that we need to actually make them happen.
Right.
I think that's a great suggestion, to tell you the truth, just to have a diversity of voices and,
right. Well, it's why in that democracy in the democracy where they had peace for 2,000 years, the Haudenosaunee, 9 different parties. Every clan was a party. And also going back to your mission, it recognized the importance of family. One of my big gripes, and I have this discussion, fortunately, I have friends that I can actually talk to about this, because I will not talk about it online, but I will talk about it here. When we talk about socialism and we talk about communism, you look at communism, this is a dictatorship. This is a philosophy that says a small group of people who we're going to decide are the best ones to decide stuff for us. Somehow, I don't even know how that works, other than basically the way it's really worked is they're strong-arming everybody. We're going to let this tiny group of people that managed to kill 50 million people who disagreed with them. Now we're afraid of them, but we're going to let them run the show. Let them run. And they're going to
to tell you the truth, Maddi, that's what I see happening with the UN. And that's what I wish everybody within the sound of my voice can understand. That I think that there's this pervasive idea that the UN is kind of non-relevant, or they're not doing anything. They kind of just take note of all of the injustice in the world, but there's no way to actually enforce it. And I think that may have been, the case, or at least a legitimate, argument against the UN back in the day, maybe pre-2015 or something like that. But since these new sustainable development goals have been brought, they all sound beautiful. They're wonderful. Who wants extreme poverty? Who wants, we all want to eradicate these things, disease, and we want everyone to have prosperity and peace. Clearly. But the way in which they're actually implementing them and making them happen through their 2030 agenda and the new urban agenda, I advise everyone to actually go on the site and read what they're talking about. It's pretty sketchy. There was one at this conference, this UN conference. There was a young person that stood up, and they were having a town hall meeting on this outcome document. So every conference that they have, they kind of put together this outcome document. Sometimes it's political with certain language that can then be used as international soft law, so it's really relevant. With this one, it's not the language produced by this outcome document is more of an influencing language because this is the Department of Global Communications, of course. They're kind of like the PR arm of the UN. But this young person stands up and says, I have a problem with this term. And she kind of, she quoted the phrase in this outcome document where it was I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was something along the lines of, we pledge to use social media to create common consensus. And just that sounds an awfully lot like propaganda. Can you please explain? And so this probably 15-year-old kid stands up and asks the question. You would not believe the kind of confusion that's going on up there with people trying to answer this question. And then she followed up and said, well, do you guys have a glossary of terms, some kind of lexicon or index of language that you're using, how you're defining them? Because we're really confused with a lot of the stuff that's in here and what it actually means. I mean, they had language in there that was talking about robust monitoring systems and all of these kinds of things that we're like, what is that? That's, can you explain? And so I feel like, people, let's open our eyes, not just what's happening within our local governments, but also what's happening with the United Nations and their direct influence in our local government.
Right.
What I'd like people to know is that, and this is, news to people oftentimes, they say the UN has direct to our local governments. They have what's called these strong city mayors. So it's a whole network of mayors that are trained and connected with the United Nations. And then they have these local city United Nations associations where they're going and they're trying to bring the UN, this is the direct quote, bring the UN to the people. And I'm saying that's all fine and dandy if it really is a democracy based on elected officials and whatnot, but it's not. It sounds a whole lot more like it's like you're saying, like a very socialist communist kind of a structure where there is this elite that has decided what the targets, what the goals are for the whole planet.
Exactly.
And then they need everybody to get on board. And my question is, how they're planning to do it is pretty sketchy. Like, you've got to read this stuff yourself.
Oh, I want to.
And I think
I will.
Yeah, part of a civil society is be informed, number one. And if you guys have a UN, conference coming to your local town, or if you have strong city mayors that you know of, or these different UN initiatives that are happening in your city, please inform yourselves and show up and have, a nuanced perspective on things. Try to, have a little bit of accountability there, because I don't think people are aware that this is happening. And it's really concerning to me.
No, I don't think people are. I'm glad you brought that up. And the really, really interesting thing that's going on in the world now is if you look at the demonstrations in Hong Kong, what are they demonstrating for? Democracy, freedom. Democracy is, there's some old quote about how democracy is terrible, but it's better than any other form of government. Democracy is the most enlightened form of government. We just have to fine tune it. We just have to fix it. You cannot go back. I am sorry, and I will debate anybody on this. Socialism, communism is all going back to monarchy. Sure. People feel very comfortable when some our parents are taking care of us, but we have to evolve beyond this. We have to go, I think I said once something, communism is just childhood, except an extension of childhood, except your parent is willing to kill you, sell your body parts, and then shove the rest of your body buried in the basement. Let's get real about this stuff. Anytime you hear somebody telling you that I'm smarter than you and I should be in charge of you, the red flag should be going up all over. The red, white, and blue flag should be going up all over the place. All this degradation of and criticism of the U.S. Constitution. I'm sorry. The U.S. Constitution, a whole lot of it, like the article I sent you, is based in the great law of peace. There's stuff that's left out, so let's put it back in. If we had freedom and peace and democracy, if one gigantic group of people that were enemies once could manage that for 2,000 years, wouldn't it be nice if we could pull that one off again? That's radical. But you can't do it with socialism, and you can't do it with communism, because it's too limiting. It's too...
oh my gosh, it's killing me that the rising generation is just jumping on this bandwagon of socialism, and they feel like it's just such this merciful kind of trendy thing
Yeah.
without really delving in and understanding what's at stake. What's at stake? And I agree with you.
And
we do need to fix some things within democracy, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly.
And then,
And a lot of this jumping into socialism, I see as like punishment and revenge. We want to punish the rich. We want to get revenge. And again, you're functioning, and I bring up often Dr. David Hawkins' book, Power versus Force. You're functioning in the force mode. You're in the lower levels of it. You want to force people to do what you want them to do. You want now. Are there people, greedy people, doing horrible things out there? Of course there are, but this doesn't mean that you, like you said, that you throw away an enlightened concept for a concept that is less enlightened. Really, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. No, what you do is you go forward. And sometimes you have to go backward. I was very fortunate this weekend to be in ceremony and training on some of the old Mesoamerican teachings. And they see the world, their universal concept is very interesting because it sees everything is available, like everything, every thought, everything in their worldview that's given to us by the creator, which is not quite an accurate description, but I would take too long to describe it now. So let's just say everything that we have from what was once the oneness that now looks delineated to us, that all that information is available to us all the time. So when we're calling something old, it's not old and we need to throw it out. It's been there for a while. We need to reconsider it. So all this knowledge that's available to us, it doesn't matter how many years ago it came from. It doesn't matter who it came from. That any idea and any knowledge is important for us to look at as we move forward as the human race, or we're not going to be here anymore.
Yeah, Absolutely. I feel like it's ancient. It's always existed, and I think it's just a matter of relearning how to tap into it again. But when it's just kind of characterized as just like an old-fashioned or a traditional quote unquote thing that just we need to evolve beyond or progress beyond, there's no progressing beyond it. That is it. It is it, and you have to tap into it and relearn it. And reapply it to fit, our current context or whatever. But it's number one, it's not going anywhere. It's the very foundation of everything else. And then we're fools by not using this incredible tool that's around us all the time. And it's ancient. So it's going to take humility because it forces us to realize that we're tethered to our ancestors and we're tethered to ways of life that means that we're just not these independent, we're not as liberated as we want to be, because you're tethered to this truth that is ancient and it's connected to your ancestors all the way back. And
and that's the balance that needs to be struck. Is between what is our ancestral knowledge and how do we apply that today? So that the reason creating this radical democracy or recreating it is so important is because it is the balance that is struck between the important contribution of individuals, the recognition of an individual within the culture. So that you look at China. I was just talking to a young man today about his experience with China, and he said, "I'm sorry, but these people are like robots." And I'm not saying anything bad about the Chinese. I know 2 Chinese expats, and they say the same thing, and it saddens them because what's happening, and everybody should see the Netflix video documentary on. It's called American Factory. If you want to understand what we're talking about, what is the purpose of producing just to produce? What is the purpose of saying, no, your family doesn't matter. Nothing matters except the fact that you meet this production deadline, that you bring in so much. How happy would any of these kids be if they were assigned a job where they had to work for 15 hours a day, and whether or not they got their bonuses and were able to go purchase anything they wanted to depended on how much they produced? How many of us would be happy if we had to work in unsafe factories? How many of us would be happy if our relatives were in prison and risked death if they didn't work for free? I mean, you've got to be honest. And everybody always sits around and goes, well, but when we do it, we'll get it right. No, you won't. Because human nature is not that way. Anytime we have tried these systems, it has ended up as dictatorship. Because it's not the way to go. Just not the way to go.
and if you have, and it's an interesting dynamic of power, too.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's a few people that have usurped a lot of power, and they're getting it from the people, but rather the goal should be that everyone has internal power.
Exactly.
Everyone has this freedom to magnify their lives in the way that they want. And I think that should be the end goal. But, just conceptually and as a paradigm, it's the idea of we'll give all of our power to a select few, and then we'll trust that they can provide for us everything that we need. But just to maintain that power, for a few people to maintain that power, it's going to come at a huge cost.
Of course.
Because, I was reading Han Feiza, for example, like he was, this military commander in ancient China, and where he was, he talks
I lost
about
you
the
for a minute
hegemon,
there.
right? And where to be able to keep and hold that power, it's that person that holds that power is living in constant threat of somebody else taking it away.
Yes.
So it's like the ultimate of scarcity mindset. Where he has no one that he can fully trust, and he always has to watch his back. He's going to get poisoned by his closest, allies and right-hand man, And so then anything is possible, just to hold on to that power. But when you empower people and then they have their own internal power, it's a generosity mindset where you want more and more people to have that same kind of an abundance and internal power to govern their lives as they will, and hope that they make the best choices. But under a structure like that, sadly, people squander their own personal power, and then there is inequality, which is hard for us because we don't want there to be inequality. We want everyone to have enough, but there's a responsibility there as well with how we empower others and how we use our internal power to create, a life of abundance for ourselves, but one that doesn't come at the cost of someone else's. And so there's a lot of responsibility on an individual to be able to live that life
exactly
in a congruent way.
And
it's hard to do.
Yes, very hard to do, but we the people are going to have to accept that responsibility if we're ever going to change, if we're ever really going to grow, I should say. I love, and I'm going to end on this note and then I'll ask you to just wrap up. But we talked about this weekend about why corn was so important in Mesoamerica. And the teaching of corn is not just that it provides food and nourishment, but that in order to grow, it has to shed its skin. And so this idea that we have to shed the old, and I don't mean old in that way like we can never use it again, but we have to shed what's keeping us from growing. And these old ideas, these old concepts are keeping us from growing. So the symbolism of corn and the snake and shedding skin, this is very, very important. This idea that you have to let go of the old in order to reach the new and in order to have growth and hopefully growing in the direction of love and kindness. So I
Right.
want to thank you so much for being on again. And of course, I will
Thank
have you on
Thank
again.
you for your patience with me as I joined a little late. I apologize.
No problem at all. And I want to thank
Yeah.
all of you out there for listening. And if you're not listening live, hopefully you're listening in the future. And any questions or comments, simply, write them, put them on the Women's Oneness Project page. Join the Women's Oneness Project page on Facebook. The website will be up soon. I'll let you know when that happens. So again, thanks to my producer, Bobby, to everybody here at Strong Island Entertainment. We love you guys. You know we do. And I wish you all peace, love, and civility. Thank you.
Wonderful, Maddi. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.